high and the mighty will fall. There will be no power brokers, the wall of power will fall. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metza. Trust me, I'm as mad as hell as the rest of you of what is going on in the Twin Cities, mad as I've ever been. I want to shout out to all the beautiful folks in the Twin Cities on the front line protesting the occupation and that are standing up to the madness. I spent 20 years in South Minneapolis and literally less than a mile from where Alex Pretty took his last breath, and it breaks my heart. I knew that neighborhood like the back of my hand. Today, we've got two guests on that are going to give us a little historical perspective and tie it in with what's going on in Minneapolis and St. Paul today as we speak. The first one is a good friend of mine. Mr. Charlie Maguire is one of the finest folk musicians in the country. He's been a long-time Twin Cities native. And he does great work. He writes songs. He writes articles. He's a photographer. And if you get a letter from it, it comes via his typewriter. And he's just a great guy. And I'm appreciating him giving us a little insight into the legendary 1934 trucker strike in downtown Minneapolis. Charlie, thanks for being here tonight. And give us a little perspective on that strike.
Sure, Paul. Before I do, want to say that where I normally record at Creation Audio at 26th and Nicollet is about a half a block from where Mr. Preddy was gunned down. So and I've recorded there too. I know that neighborhood so well, and I was thinking about Steve Weiss and everybody at the studio. Of course, formerly K-Bank Studio, where such songs as Surfin' Bird and 6 Days on the Road were recorded. So, right.
Yeah, I feel for that. So, Charlie, tell us about the strike. First of all, tell us about personally, because you're recording a record there right now, or just got done.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I wasn't in the studio at the time, but we're mastering and everything at that same studio, and did most of the work, early on in December. But I had to give the folks at Creation a call just to make sure that everything was okay over there, because it looked pretty, it looked pretty dicey, especially right after the shooting last Saturday. So, but it does have a lot of parallels, as you rightly say, between the Teamsters strike of 1934 and what's going on now. The Teamsters was Local 574, and the same reasons why people walk out, with strikes today is, low wages, disrespect, the same kind of thing. The Teamsters organized the coal haulers first. Remember, Minneapolis was a coal town still back in 1934. And then that spread to a general strike. And I'm just giving you the high points here.
Yeah.
That caused 35,000 other workers in Minneapolis to walk out.
Wow.
That brought everyone back to the bargaining table, and but things were violated again on July 17th. Now, Paul, they had this thing back in those days called flying pickets, and what the Teamsters would do is they had a bunch of guys in a truck, and if they heard that someone was crossing a picket line somewhere, or there was no picket line, and commerce was going on, these guys would drive over and set one up real quick. They'd get a phone call, or some kind of a message, and they'd drive over to, say, a coal yard or any place where heavy trucks, were used, and they'd set up a picket line, and then, no one would go across it. Well, a group called the Citizens Alliance, which reminds me a little bit of ICE. These guys were deputized by the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department. They were regular civilians, a lot of them business types, conservative, anti-union, didn't really like what was going on. And they were given badges. I sent you a photo of a badge earlier this morning.
Yes,
and
amazing.
These guys would set up a trap, basically, at the corner of North 3rd Street and North 7th Avenue in Minneapolis that July 20th day in 1934. And the flying pickets came over, and the Citizens Alliance was there. They started pushing them around. They got pushed back. They called in the police department. Over 100 police people showed up, and they took aim at the assembled crowd. Now the crowd had gathered, just kind of like the way things are going now. I mean, ICE goes somewhere, protesters show up, and things, sometimes go south from there. And on that July day, police opened fire on the crowd. They wounded 47 workers, and they killed a World War I veteran and another friend, a World War I veteran, Henry B. Ness. And totally, two people were killed, Mr. Ness and Mr. John Ballore. Ness was shot standing up, and then once again while he was lying down. Wow. Now, doesn't that remind you of something?
It sure does.
And Ballore, I'm not sure, but a fusillade of bullets went into that crowd, and like what happened after Rachel Good's murder on Portland Avenue.
Yeah, Renee Good, not Rachel.
Yeah, Renee Good. Yeah, it started the same kind of groundswell that Ness had at his funeral. Over 100,000 people attended Henry Ness's funeral at Crystal Lake Cemetery in Minneapolis.
Wow.
Now, I mean, I can't tell you how similar these things are, at least in my mind and possibly your listeners. We have people showing up. We have people who are untrained. Firearms are discharged, and people die.
Hey.
And so here is a case in point where it's really important to know your history, because history tells you, yes, the darker side, of our Minneapolis streets down here. Yes, it does. There's no doubt about that. But it also gives you strength, because people should know that a lot of the things that they did in 34 we're doing now. Back then, they had their own newspaper. The strikers did. And now, of course, we use social media. They set up a hospital, for people who were injured as a result of union action, and and confrontation with not only the Citizens Alliance but the police. We're doing the same thing,
right?
And there was strength in numbers. 100,000 people, at a time showed up. Think about it, 100,000 people. Right. I mean, the last march we had here, I mean, I can't get a correct count. I mean, some people said 20, some people said 50,000 on the street. This was 100,000.
Wow,
people
incredible.
in 1934.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So history, that old saying about if you don't pay attention to history, it tends to repeat itself. And here we go again in 2026.
I just had a great conversation with the guy. If you don't know him, you should. Aaron Brown. He's a journalist from Hibbing. He teaches in Hibbing, but he writes a community voices column for the Minnesota Star Tribune. And we just had a conversation about the 1916 strike on the Iron Range, where there was where people were killed and miners were going through the same sort of suppression that they did in 1934. Of course, you know a lot about the Iron Range. You've written about it. You've sung songs about it. Tell us about some of the parallels between what's going on now and what went on in the Iron Range.
Well, yeah, I wrote a whole musical about it with Jim Miller and Lance Bilbo called Masabi Red. We actually took it on the road to Hibbing High School into that great and wonderful auditorium back in the late 1980s. And it was somewhat the same thing. The catalyst there was, much the same. Disrespect, low wages, mine cave-ins. The IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, headquartered in Chicago, sent some organizers up to the Iron Range to kind of pull some things together. And, this was an important thing, Paul, as you know, because the Iron Range of Minnesota supplied almost 80% of all the iron ore to the United States at that time.
Right.
So the miners going out on strike was akin to maybe like having a railroad strike or something as crippling as that. Plus, people in Washington and other places were very, very, attuned to the fact that Europe was at war and we could be soon. Right. And if during that 1916 period, and if we didn't have the steel, there was no way that we were going to win.
Right.
And, of course, I always tell the people the only reason why we prevailed in World War I and World War II is, yes, there was courage everywhere in our armed services. But let's not forget the men and women of the Iron Range, who made those materials possible. One of
the striking miners shot by the Pinkertons was on his front porch in my hometown of Virginia, Minnesota. I grew up with a lot of this history and know a lot of the stuff, as well as you do. And that's why I do feel empowered by seeing my friends, especially down in Minneapolis, braving the cold, getting there, standing arm to arm against these thugs. You're living down there right now, Charlie Maguire. What can you tell us? What are your friends telling you, and what are you saying?
Well, I haven't seen any ice in my neighborhood. I live in Northeast Minneapolis, around just right in the the main street of Northeast. Maybe 7 blocks from the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. But I am aware, though, of people over in Southeast Minneapolis, around the U and Dinkytown. They've been seen there, and of course down in South Minneapolis, where I have family as well, and we're all involved at one level or another in delivering food, doing. Taking children to school because their parents can't drive them because they're afraid of being picked up, donating clothing. I think everybody is, there's a lot more going on than people realize from social media, because there's a lot going on that you don't see,
right.
It's not everyone is necessarily on the street photographing and recording. Other people are doing lots of other things that are helping, our our friends and neighbors down here, doing less, like I said, food, clothing, rides, you name it. There's and it's all going on.
Well, because we've got the greatest state in the union, Charlie Maguire. I'm a lifelong Minnesotan. I ain't going anywhere. And I know you're a transplant, but you've been here for years and years. I went to an event, a fundraiser for the Boundary Waters last night here in Duluth. And I was talking to a young woman who's actually from the Iron Range, very politically involved. And she said, what can I do? And what, to me at my age, how would I view what's going on through my eyes? And I think I told her, I said, we've been through, now as I'm entering my 7th decade, times is dark, but I don't remember them being as dangerous.
Yes, and there's a sign today where the 1934 shooting occurred. It's on a building at the corner of North 3rd Street and North 7th Avenue. That tells people who walk by exactly what happened on that corner. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe there may be someday signs on Nicollet and on Portland.
Yeah.
That also may tell people what happened in 2026, 92 years later. Interestingly enough, Paul, I met people when I was at the sign dedication, for the Teamsters.
Yeah.
I met people who were children back then. They remember, and I think what we're going to see in years to come are other children, maybe 100 years from now.
Absolutely.
Who remember what went on the streets of Minneapolis right now.
Charlie Maguire, this is great. And and traumatized kids, man, God bless them all. Be safe, be warm, Charlie. We're going to go into the new Springsteen song called Streets of Minneapolis, and then be back with Stephen Meyer, Dr. Stephen Meyer, to talk about his book, My Father Against the Nazis. Thanks, Charlie, and solidarity. Love you, brother.
Okay, take care, Paul. You are my brother.
Through the winter's ice and cold, down Nicollet Avenue, a city of flame fought fire and ice neath an occupier's boots. King Trump's private army from the DHS, guns belted to their coats, came to Minneapolis to enforce the law, or so their story goes. Against smoke and rubber bullets in the dawn's early light, citizens stood for justice, their voices ringing through the night. And there were bloody footprints where mercy should have stood, and 2 dead left to die on snow-filled streets, Alex Pretty and Renee Good. Oh, Minneapolis, I hear your voice singing through the bloody mist. We'll take our stand for this land and the stranger in our midst. Here in our home they killed and roamed in the winter of 26. We'll remember the names of those who died on the streets of Minneapolis.
Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. When you hear those angelic voices, you know you are listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour with Paul Metza. And in this weather, if you hear some dogs barking in the background, you are also listening to a Paul Metza radio show, because I'm recording this from my living room in Lincoln Park in Duluth, and it's 10 below, and the dogs are going a little nutty. But anyway, I've got a great guest on. He wrote a book called My Father Against the Nazis. We're going to talk about the book and see if there's any correlation between what he sees going on in the Twin Cities and the rest of America, and how it correlates to his book and his father's experience. I would like to welcome Mr. Steve Mayer to the show. Steve, how are you this evening?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much, Paul. Glad to be here.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the genesis of the book and your father's experience and what inspired you to finally tell the story.
Sure. Well, I've been lugging this story around for a long time, since I was born, pretty much, I think, which was, I got about 10 years on you, Paul. And I grew up with my father's story, largely untold, but kind of, I was steeped in the PTSD of World War II, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He was born in 1907 in Germany, and long story short, he came of age during the First World War, went to law school, and on the day he graduated and passed his bar exams, he was told by the new regime in Berlin in 1933 that his services would not be needed anymore, that Jews could not be lawyers anymore.
Wow.
They could not serve in the civil service, and he was left high and dry. And I came to learn the details of this story a bit later. Can I go back a little bit and tell you the earlier part? Okay.
Sure.
So it kind of starts for me in high school when I was cast as the role of Anne Frank's father in the Diary of Anne Frank, which our high school produced. This was in around 1960 or so, not that long after the war, and not that long after that diary was found and published, and then a play was produced on Broadway. And I played the part of Anne Frank's father, and as it happened, when I was just a little pup, and as it happened, my grandmother was in the audience, and she had known Otto Frank as youngsters in the 1920s, when Franks were still in Frankfurt, before the Nazis came to town, and they fled to Amsterdam. So my grandmother was in the audience. My parents were in the audience. It was a Boffo show. And the next morning at breakfast around the table, I took the opportunity. Really, I was just this ignorant little, emotionally stupid teenager. I asked my father, I said, "So what's the story here? What happened with you in the war, or in when it hit the fan? What happened to your parents?" And he looked up, and it was like that painting, that the silent scream, that Charles Munch painting, where this anguished cry that I couldn't hear. It was a silent scream. It really was. And my mother told me the story, the short story, that, well, they were captured. My father's parents were captured and sent to Theresienstadt. And then towards the end of the war, they were sent to Auschwitz and shoveled into those ovens on the last weekend of operations. And that my parents didn't even learn about that until after the war. They'd come to this country by that time. They had just escaped, barely, after Kristallnacht, and escaped to England and then to the U.S. My father signed up with the Army right after Pearl Harbor, went into intelligence services, went overseas after the liberation of Paris, and the war ended. I was born just before the war ended, and things were kind of dark in our household. I mean, I have this memory of a big secret, a big untold story, and it wasn't really until this Diary of Anne Frank production that I came into the full glare of that untold story. And as I said, I've been lugging it around ever since. And I finally got around to writing this book about my father against the Nazis. That's what it's called.
Tell us what it was like when your father finally started to tell you the story. It must have been harrowing.
It was, and he never really told me much. I learned about it more from my mother and my grandmother. Is my father, he was a silent man, like many World War II veterans or any veteran who got too close to the fire. And we see them all around us today, not just World War II, but it's part of the story is the kind of the inherited trauma from situations like that. But I learned about it from my mother and grandmother slowly, and I knew it was an exceptional story. And I came to learn that not every kid had a story like that. And it was sort of steeping in the back of my brain. And then when my father finally passed, I was about 40 years old then, and we'd had a terrible relationship. We didn't speak much. I resented his absence. And where was he? He was upstairs in the attic, hunched over his typewriter, telling the story, not to me, but to the courts in Germany that had been set up after the war to give restitution or compensation to people who'd had all their stuff stolen from them, which was the case. And so that's how I witnessed my father's storytelling, kind of him. I kind of see this cigarette smoke and him typing and a glass of scotch and cursing. And he spent pretty much the rest of his life trying to recover what he had lost through the court system. And he prevailed in that. He did pretty well with that. He was a good lawyer. He'd been trained in the law, and he finally got to use it to get some measure of justice. It was financial, but that's, yeah.
Steve Mayer, did he go back overseas to work in the courts in Germany or London or wherever this was? Or where did he do his legal work then at that point?
Well, that's a very good question. And there's a good story that goes with that. We were living in Washington, D.C. He had a day job with the U.S. Department of Commerce as an economist. He'd hurry right home at 5 o'clock, have dinner, and go upstairs. But this legal work was conducted in the courts in Germany.
Wow.
And we had a liaison there. This is a good story. So when my father was in the Army, in intelligence, his job, he was part of a group called the Ritchie Boys, which was a famous group. Movies have been made, books have been made about the Ritchie Boys. These were all German-speaking, pretty much all Jewish refugees with an axe to grind. And they wanted to go and do some service in this war. They had a hard time signing up because they were called enemy aliens at first because they were German and they were Jewish and they were stateless, but they finally prevailed in that. And one day, so my father was shipped out from Camp Ritchie, to England for a few months, where they were setting up for D-Day and setting up to interrogate captured prisoners. And that's what my father was trained to do in the soft arts of interrogation, gain their trust and get them to talk. And then they went to France after D-Day. He rode into Paris. He rode into Compiègne, where Eisenhower was based. And that was a center for interrogation also. And one day, someone was brought to him, and my father recognized him instantly as an old school buddy, an old neighborhood buddy, law school buddy, great friend, not Jewish, and in uniform, German uniform.
Wow.
This guy was kind of beat up and didn't quite recognize Paul at first, my father at first, but then they did. And my father got a lot of good, useful information out of this guy, useful for how the Allies prosecuted the rest of the war, the Battle of the Bulge in particular, which was looming. And they got in touch. After the war ended, they got in touch, those two best friends, former best friends. And this guy said, maybe I can do something to help you. You help me. Because of all the information this guy spilled, my father was able to get him a little softer deal.
Right.
And let me help you. And so I'll be your paralegal, and I'll try to open doors and push the paperwork and make sure things keep rolling. And that's what he did.
That's a movie in itself.
It is. It really is. Get Spielberg, can you? Yeah.
It's just incredible. We've got Steve Mayer on for the rest of the show. He's got a new book out called My Father Against the Nazis. Tell us, before we go to break, tell us a little bit about where people can track you down in your book. You got a website?
I don't have a website. I don't, but you can track me down on any digital book selling platform, even Amazon. And bookshop.org. So my name, Stephen E. Mayer, and the title, M-A-Y-E-R, My Father Against the Nazis. I should get a website, but yeah.
Well, we'll be back. We're going to listen to a little music here and be back with Steve for the rest of the show on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. I happen to write this one's called Another Man's Chains. Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is the third set. My guest, Stephen Mayer, has written a great book called My Father Against the Nazis. He's going to be on to the end of the show tonight. Steve, so tell us a little bit about the how Nazi Germany started, and what do you see in the reflections of what's happening in America today?
Yeah, well, that's a big, fat, juicy question. And when I started writing the book, I was not intending to write about similarities between then and now. But in the 3 years it took me to write it, the similarities became more obvious. And So I wrote in the introduction that everyone's free to make their own comparisons, but that was not my intent. My intent was to really write this history. But since I lay out the history in such detail, kind of year by year, with newsreels like the kind that you'd see in newspapers in the 1930s and 40s, and I would begin each section of each chapter with those newsreels, and then I would intersperse my father's story within that. But as I unrolled the newsreels, you could see the way change happened. And plus I read some stuff, of course. And William Shirer's book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, is really very good. And he makes very clear that the three basic principles that Hitler drew on were propaganda and organization and terror. And the propaganda part began even before he was sent to jail for treason in 1922, when he was kind of this rabble-rouser creating a party, the National Socialist Party, and gathering hoodlums and thugs around him who shared his sense of grievance, a kind of a nationalist sense of grievance born in the loss by Germany and the Emperor of the war, the First World War. Germany lost, to every German's surprise. They had no idea they were losing. Their country hadn't even been invaded, but the military people realized that they were being stymied and crushed on the Eastern Front and the Western Front. And they persuaded the emperor to surrender and flee, and which surprised everyone. And so there was quite some sense of shock. And Hitler was just a young corporal from Austria. He wasn't even German. But he had a gift of oratory from the very beginning, and he inspired people to be in touch with their own grievance and their own sense of a country betrayed and a country wronged and a country of superior Germanic people who were the best on the planet and superior to everyone. And if Germany is to be great again, they would need to carry this sense of supremacy with them wherever they went. And the Nazi Party grew and thrived. And by 1930, they didn't have a majority, but they had more votes than any other party. And there were a lot of other parties on the left. The left was very big during all of this, partly because the economy was really struggling. Nazism grew when the economy of the early 20s was really in the tank. The German, partly from their defeat, and partly the world economy, born in the Industrial Revolution and the big struggle among the big empires and the big nations for expansion and exploitation. That whole thing was cracked and falling. And so the economy, the world over, it's the same economy that inspired the truckers' strike in 1934. Right. I didn't hear Charlie's presentation, but those are the same times. And so then they were trying democracy at the same time. That barely worked. And Hitler persuaded the country that he was the only one who could fix things. And they, along with a bunch of skullduggery and behind-the-scenes criminal activity, they managed to persuade the parliament to make him be the one and only sole dictator.
Wow. Sounds familiar. Why did they target the Jews?
Well, the Jews have been enemies since 400 AD or so.
Yeah.
and it is still kind of a mystery, but somehow those Germanic people needed to target somebody all the time. Right. And Jews were a convenient target. And so they kept Jews down and exploited them, kept them down and exploited. Occasionally they'd give them some rights. They could then, be part of society, but they were relegated to being moneylenders, essentially. And, who likes the bank? No one likes the bank. And everyone thinks the bank is, screwing them over. And so there was a lot of animosity about that. And just a whole lot of Christian history and Jewish history rubbed different cultures doing their thing and not getting along.
Steve, we just got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So what are the lessons that you've learned from writing your book, My Father Against the Nazis, that you think could be applied today for the people protesting the occupation?
Okay, good. Thank you for asking. Because I don't think we live in Germany. I don't think this is 1933. I think there are lots of similarities between the rise of Nazism and the way our present government is behaving. Lots of scary similarities. And the threat is real. But America has a lot more going for it than Germany ever did, ever. We're much more experienced with democracy. Germans loved authority, and Americans loved to give their finger to authority. It's a very different culture. And what we have going for us is 250 years of people working out their own arrangements and rules for engagement with each other, and being neighbors and working in communities and creating nonprofits and community organizations and cultural organizations that keep the culture alive and that create relationships. We are thick with relationships with people and communities, and those are our national treasure, I think, is our people. And we see it here in Minneapolis, gloriously so. We see it. It's just a remarkable upsurge of really the power of the people to form constructive, resisting, creative, joyful, painful ties that bind all of us in a way that hopefully prevails the big, nasty, ugly powers that are trying to squash it. And I think that we have to prevail. I know the country's watching, and other countries too, and we have to bring out the best of of American, which is the use of free speech, the use of freedom of the press, the use of associating and assembling and joining in common cause, the use of petition. All the rights that are granted to us are our national treasure, and we have to fight to keep them in our service.
Steve Meyer, that is a beautiful way to end the show on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. Get Steve's book, My Father Against the Nazis. I think we're in agreement. We're going to beat these bastards yet.
Thank you. Amen. You said it better than I did.
Have a great weekend, Steve. I'll be in touch soon.
Paul.
Thanks for your time.
It's an honor being here.
They are banning the books. Well, the books they read, obeying the voices that they hear in their heads. They like to say they are more righteous than you. They're just fool after fool after fool. They're just fool after fool after fool. They banish the women and silence their voice, enclose hang rallies with no other choice, handcuff the doctors and the scientists do
Thanks for listening to the Wall and Power Radio Hour. The show was produced by Paul Metza, engineered by Brett Johnson. We'd like to thank our guests, Mr. Charlie Maguire and Mr. Steve Mayer. Stay strong and positive out there on the streets. Stay warm, but stay safe. You can find my stuff at paulmetza.com, including my new song, No Kings, No Crown, that I was honored to record with the great Alan Sparhawk. We're here every week on AM 950, the Wall of Power Radio Hour, going on 15 years here in a while. And remember, like my dad used to tell me, remember to be kind and make someone happy.
Someday